Attention landlords, the cities of Pomona and Bell Gardens have just passed their individual versions of rent control. And before you dismiss this video because you don't own in either of those two cities, my question to you is this: what happens when the city you do own in chooses to pass its own version of rent control? Because it's coming. The inevitable is coming. More and more cities throughout the state have determined that statewide rent control is not enough. They know best. So stay tuned in as we're going to dive in. What can you do about all the new restrictions that are taking place throughout the state? Welcome back to the Apartment Dealer Show. I'm Chris German, the Apartment Dealer, and today we're going to discuss Pomona, Bell Gardens. These two cities have just passed their own version of rent control. What does it mean to you, first and foremost, if you happen to own in those two cities? And second, if you own outside those cities, well, what can you do now to prepare your properties for the inevitable? Because bets are your city soon enough will determine it needs its own version of rent control. They know better than what was passed statewide. And so by learning what the other individual cities are putting in place will help you again to position your rents, your tenants, and so forth for a profitable future. Now, let's start with rent control as a whole. One more time, 100th time on this show. All buildings within the state of California, multifamily properties, are under rent control. Why do I say that one more time? Because I still get calls from landlords who tell me, well, Chris, no, well, hold on. We start having this rent control conversation. Oh, no, my building is not under rent control. Yes, it is. All buildings are under AB 1482. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with AB 1482, we'll put a link here. We have other videos where we've spoken at great length to this. But it covers all multifamily properties within the state if your property is older than 15 years, or the way they say it is if a building is 15 years new and it's a rolling calendar, then those buildings are not under rent control. Every other building is, so bets are your properties are under rent control. Well, under AB 1482, as of the recording of this video, 2022, you can raise your rents for a total of 10%. How do we determine that? The way AB 1482 is written is that it has a 5% base that does not change year to year. So at the minimum, you're going to be able to raise the rents 5%. But you also get to add to that the change in CPI, the change of inflation year over year, April to April. For example, last year, 2021, the change in CPI was 3.7%. So if you owned in a city or in a county that didn't have its own version of rent control or its own limitations, you could have raised your rents for a total of 8.7%, 5% base, plus the 3.7% change in CPI. Now here in 2022, 5% base still stays, but as we know, there's been historic inflation, so the change in CPI is over 5%. 5 plus 5, 10%. So as of the recording of this video, you could raise your, and unless you own in Bell Gardens, Pomona, and Baldwin Park, and other cities in unincorporated LA and other areas we can name, you could raise your rents for a total of 10%. That's very important as we make a comparison of city to city. What are the opportunities as an investor, as a landlord? What are the restrictions? How do we navigate to where we're going to make our next purchase, 1031 exchange or what have you? We first have to know, hey, how much cash flow can we extract from these properties? So first, let's dive into Pomona, the recent ordinance that was just passed. Now, this is a 90-day emergency ordinance, as we're going to come to learn here. But it's only 90 days because they're drafting and writing what's going to be the permanent ordinance, which I can only imagine is going to be worse than the emergency ordinance, because it always is with all the other cities that have gone this route. To help us understand about this ordinance, let's take it now to my partner, Deepan Shah, who specializes in the Inland Empire.
Hi, this is Deepan Shah with the Apartment Dealer. Now, most of you are familiar with the California blanket rent control that was enacted in 2020. Pomona, the city of Pomona, has decided to cap or introduce their own version of rent control. The city of Pomona, with the new bill that has just passed in August of this year, only allows a landlord to increase rent by 4% or the increase in inflation, whichever is less. In other words, if inflation was only 3%, then a landlord cannot raise rent by 4%. They would have to stick to the 3%. Now, on top of this rent cap, the city went another step further to describe and outline that any decrease in housing services constitutes as a rent increase. Now, I'm going to unwind that a little bit. I'll give you an example. If you as a landlord are currently paying utilities for a tenant, whether it's electricity, water, trash, gas, and now try to pass that on to the tenant because you can only increase rent by so much, the city of Pomona constitutes that decrease in housing services as a rent increase. And so the tenant now has the right to petition with the city of Pomona that that decrease is unjustified and will count as a rent increase. Therefore, the rent has already been increased. That tenant will also have the right to petition a normal rent increase if they believe that the unit is not in livable condition or has not been repaired up to code. Now, aside from the new cap in rent increases that the city of Pomona has brought into law, they've also constituted that any 60-day notice given to a tenant, a 60-day notice to vacate that is given to a tenant, has to also be sent to the city of Pomona. The city of Pomona is allowed to view that 60-day notice and justify whether that can be accomplished or needs to be rescinded according to their laws. Now, this again can be petitioned by the tenant and brought up with the city of Pomona, essentially making the process of an eviction or removal of a tenant that much harder. And lastly, the city of Pomona also does not constitute the removal of any tenant over the age of 62 or a tenant that is disabled. And lastly, a tenant that has been living in that particular unit for over 10 years. Now, there are some more intricacies to this law. We haven't covered everything here, but those 3 items that I stated are the major moving parts of that bill. Again, we don't share this information to scare you as the landlord, but our goal is to keep you informed so that you don't find yourself in muddy water or with a lawsuit that's unwanted. Thank you for watching. And again, this is Deepan Shah with The Apartment Dealer.
That's scary stuff, right? Well, not as scary as Bell Gardens. So let's go through Bell Gardens, and I have my cheat notes here. First of all, Bell Gardens, they used what they call a base rent. Your base rent is going to be based off of April of 2022. So in determining, well, how much of a rental increase can you give your tenants, we have to start by using whatever the rent was in April 22. Now, that brings up a good question right off the bat. What if you raised your rents after April 22 based upon AB 1482, right, statewide rent control? You definitely would be outside of this ordinance. What are you to do now? My reading of the ordinance, there wasn't an answer to that, so I would suggest you call housing and have them direct you what are you to do now. But for those of you that are yet to raise your rent in Bell Gardens, or you want to learn more about the ordinance, it's based upon a base of April this year. Second, exemptions. They do outline 2 exemptions as well regarding what's under rent control, what's not. The first, if a property was built after 1995, okay, it was built in 1996 and forward, then you don't fall under this ordinance. Second, if you live personally in a multifamily property that has 3 units or less, your property, for as long as you live in it, and that's the main thing here, for as long as you live in it, does not fall under this ordinance. Now, keep in mind, even though under those 2 exemptions, you may not fall under the Bell Gardens ordinance, you still fall under AB 1482. You still have to comply with statewide rent control. I just want to make that very, very clear. So how do we determine how much we can raise our rent? this is where it gets really troubling. It's one of two options. Either 50% of the change in CPI or 4%, whichever is lower. Okay, what does that mean? All right. Just a little while ago, I said in 2021, the change in CPI was 3.7%. So you could raise your rent here in Bell Gardens. 50% of that number, 50% of 3.7, or 4%, whichever is lower, but obviously 50% of 3.7 is less. How about if this ordinance would have been in place in 2020? In 2020, the change in CPI was 1.7%. That means you would have only been able to raise your rents half of 1.7%. Do you see why this is a problem? Yes, we've had historic inflation. So you're probably going to get the 4% pop because I'm sure the change in CPI, I know the change in CPI is greater than 4%. So it's probably going to be 4% for you this year, probably 4% for you next year because inflation is still ticking away at a heavy step. But when inflation returns to a more normal number, and you're talking about being able to raise your rent only 50% of the change of inflation, as a landlord, you're going to have a problem. How do you keep pace with the cost of living? How do you keep pace with labor going up, repairmen, maintenance, items you go down to Home Depot and buy for your apartments have all gone up astronomically. How you keep pace with that given these restrictions, something to consider. Now, if your current rent is what they consider less than 80% of fair market value, okay, it's less than 80% of fair market value, you can actually give the tenant an additional 3% rental increase on top of the original increase, okay, for as long as it takes you year over year to meet market rent. The problem with this is you don't get to go on Zillow, you don't get to go on Facebook rentals, you don't get to go on apartments.com and show the city, look, other people are renting their 1 bedrooms, their 2 bedrooms, what have you, for X amount. That is fair market value. No. They have a special firm that you need to confirm with what is fair market value. So again, they rig the system, but at least it's an option. At least you can raise your rents beyond this initial setting if you're less than their determination of 80% of market value. Now, also included in this ordinance is capital improvement pass-throughs. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, because we've never had to deal with it, right, not having rent control, this type of stringent rent control, a pass-through is this. You make some type of capital improvement, either to a tenant's unit, the unit they dwell in, or to the property itself where each tenant gets to enjoy that improvement. Let's say a security automatic gate, for example. All tenants would be able to enjoy that. So you can pass through the cost of that improvement to all, let's say you had 10 units, it's a 10-unit property. All 10 units could be charged back for this capital improvement. How much can you charge? Bell Gardens says that you can charge a total of 50% of whatever the item was that you repaired or installed or what have you. 50% of the bill charged over 5 years. So how do you calculate this? So let's say something costs $10,000. Well, 50% of $10,000 is $5,000. What I'm not saying is, okay, well, $5,000, you charge that over 5 years, you charge a tenant $1,000 per year for 5 years. They also say that if, once you do the math, what you plan to charge back the tenant is more than what would be a 5% increase in the rental amount, okay, 5%, more than 5%, then you actually have to prolong the amount of time that you're going to charge back for this capital improvement so that it does not exceed the 5%. So needless to say, it's gonna be tough to have capital improvements make sense under this mathematical formula. And my guess would be that landlords will say, well, it's just not worth it. And unfortunately, that's one of the side effects of rent control, is that landlords see to it that, well, if I'm going to be restricted on how much I can raise my rents and I can't cover the cost of things, well, then I'm going to reconsider beautifying my property, beautifying my rental units. And so that's a conversation for another day. But again, this is how rent control does not serve the people they choose to, or they intend to help. Other items that are in this ordinance. First, you have to give the tenants a notice of their rights. And this notice apparently is being drafted by the city. And essentially it's going to contain, well, here, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, here's all the reasons why I can raise rent, can't raise rent, by how much. Here's essentially why we're going to potentially end up in a lawsuit together. So I'm not saying tenants shouldn't know their rights. I just don't think the burden falls upon landlords. No different than I don't believe the burden of providing cheap housing falls upon landlords. I think the market, the open market, should determine these things, but that's my own opinion. Obviously, as a landlord investor myself, I have an opinion about this. Also contained within the ordinance is this dandy here. If you do not follow the guidelines, for each infraction, you will be charged up to $1,000 per infraction per each time that you don't follow the rules. Second, and worse, if you're caught violating the ordinance, it says that you can be charged with a misdemeanor and spend up to 6 months in jail, if you can imagine. That's why it's very important to understand what's contained in this ordinance. There's also verbiage in the ordinance that says that the tenants that are covered under this new ordinance have to have dwelled in the unit more than 12 months. Hence the importance of leases that are not more than, say, 10 or 11 months. And we've known that ever since the passage of AB 1482. So that's one of the key things within the ordinance itself. And again, I highly encourage you, give the ordinance a read for yourself. There's also buyout agreements. There's an allowance for buyout agreements. So interestingly enough, they do not outline any mathematical formula of how much do you and the tenant have to agree to on a buyout. So I imagine, you and the tenant can square away any type of deal that you'd like. But the caveat is you have to give notice to the city that you're engaging the tenant on a buyout agreement. You actually have to give a copy of the buyout agreement to the city. And there's verbiage that has to go on the buyout agreement to the effect of, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, you have 30 days to rescind from this agreement. Please know that you don't have to agree to this agreement. And there's other verbiage that has to be on the agreement. It cannot just be a handshake deal, so you need to be conscientious of that. And most alarming, at least for me, in our approach of investing, is that there is no mention of substantial improvement. So for those of you that have been avid viewers of our show, have been to any of our educational events, you know that under AB 1482, they make an allowance for tenant to vacate a unit, vacate tenants, so that you can make substantial improvements to a unit. The bulk of multifamily properties here, at least in Southern California, were built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Well, the plumbing has exceeded its expected life. The electrical panels, items need to be updated. Well, you can't feasibly do or maintain those items with the tenant living in the unit. They must vacate, and so that's allowed under the law. And so if you're hearing this for the first time, give AB 1482 a read over. And there is, again, it is allowed that you can give a notice to a tenant, 60-day notice, to ask them to vacate the unit permanently so that you can then come behind them, make these improvements, and then do what? Bring your rents to not only market value, but if you renovate the unit correctly, well above market value. And that's something that we do personally, my wife and I, in the properties that we purchase. I only own in California, so all my properties fall under these rules. The point is to understand the rules, operate within the rules, but then to still flourish and maximize your cash flow. So what can we do? What should we do? Number one, raise your rents. If you own outside these cities, or you own outside a jurisdiction that has its own version of rent control, its own limitations, and you fall under AB 1482, raise your rents 10% now. That's what's allowed under statewide rent control for 2022. Raise your rents. Do not feel bad about raising your rents. You cannot imagine how many landlords, investors that I have worked with, that I've advised, that they feel guilty about raising their rents. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe they feel like they're using their rental units as charity to help these individuals. But my suggestion would be this, just my opinion. Maximize the cash flow from your rental properties so that you then can take that passive income and spread the love and spread it around to all the charities that your heart desires. My wife and I love doing things like that, but we don't allow our rental units to hold us back. Okay, we do what we need to. We offer great housing in terms of condition, quality, and amenities so that we can get above market rents to then provide for ourselves, our children, and of course, then spread the love around as well. Raise your rents first and foremost. 10% if you do not own in a city or a county jurisdiction that has some other type of limitation. If you don't know, seek legal counsel. That's the best I can tell you. If you're not sure what are the limitations, seek legal counsel. If you call my office, what is Chris going to say? I'm going to tell you, seek legal counsel, because we don't give that type of counsel here. First and foremost, I'm a realtor, and I would not want to give you the wrong advice. Second, if you still have questions in terms of, okay, substantial improvements, what should we be improving? Which improvements turn around and bring about the highest rental rates? What's allowed under the law? Tenant evictions, rent control, all the rest. I would highly advise you come to our next Apartment Owners Educational Luncheon. Two things about this though is that number one, you must be a landlord and investor who owns multifamily properties in the areas that we service. How will you know? Well, you would have received this mailer here recently about our upcoming event. And so that tells you, hey, we're in the apartment dealer team service area. We're welcome to this event. Again, we can not open it, too wide because then we would not serve those communities that we're most familiar with. Number one, must be a landlord in our area of service. Number two, you cannot have attended an event this year. Why do I do that? Because the event itself is so popular that individuals who just went to the event in the spring would want to come to our event that's coming up here in October. And then that would take away seats from individuals who have not had an opportunity to come and join us this year. So you can only attend one event per year. I could have this in a massive auditorium, hundreds of people, because that's how much inquiry that we get. I choose to keep the event small and intimate so that as an attendee, you can have your personal questions answered by our panel of speakers. There comes a point in the afternoon where we pass the mic around, and so if you have a personal challenge when it comes to your rentals, we have the professionals in the room that can address that, and they give you 100% of the answer. It's not, here's half the answer, and then come schedule an appointment with me, and then I'll give you the rest of the answer after paying a sitting fee. That's probably the biggest bang here in terms of value, is that I bring together the most prominent individuals here locally when it comes to real estate law, taxation, market forecasting, and lending. Those individuals that have decades of experience to be at your disposal, really, and to answer your questions and to inform you what has changed year over year and what's pending change, what should we be aware of come 2023. So not only do we dive into the legalities of owning multifamily properties, we dive into the taxation, market direction, commercial lending, and loans and so forth, and we cover current property values, rental rates, the trends of rentals. Our panel of speakers are here to ensure that you do not just survive as a multifamily investor, but that you truly, truly thrive and that you build your financial legacy for yourself and for your heirs. Our next event will be Tuesday, October 4th, and we will have, again, some of the best individuals that you can put yourself in front of to learn about all things multifamily. I hope you'll join us. If it's not rent control, it's one thing or another that continues to challenge landlords. Owning multifamily properties has never been more challenging. And we also, right now, are at a time when interest rates are rising, the economy is in flux. It's not getting any easier, is the point. And so we need to equip ourselves with the right information, be in the know. We cannot be ignorant to these things if we want to win at a high level as multifamily investors. One more time, I highly encourage you to be with us. It's free. It's all educational. There's not one sales pitch at all. Literally, you come, eat with us, learn, walk away, feeling that much more empowered to take your rentals to the next step. I hope you found today's show informative. Remember, share this video with a friend. Who needs to know this information? Who do you know that's a multifamily investor? Second, I don't know why you wouldn't have already, but if you have not, subscribe to our channel so that you always get a notice about when we're releasing our new videos. And we will be sharing content from our educational luncheon. Not the full event, but we will share some takeaways. So obviously you want to be able to get your hands on that information as well. And most importantly, Chris German from the Apartment Dealer, wishing you positive cash flow, tenants who behave, and much protection from Uncle Sam. Till next time.